Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in two separate playlists on the channel. Obviously, the poetry discussion playlist, but also the Emily Dickinson playlist. So there are over 200 poems in the poetry discussion playlist already, and there are almost 65, I believe, poetry discussions in the Emily Dickinson playlist. So if you are a fan of either poetry and or Emily Dickinson, maybe check out those poetry discussions. As always, if you enjoy what you see here, hitting the like button helps me out on the channel. It tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button, because literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. Poetry every Mondays, also short story read-alongs, novel read-alongs, all of the like. We are here today for The Saddest Noise, the Sweetest Noise by Emily Dickinson. The poem itself reads as such: the saddest noise, the sweetest noise, the maddest noise that grows. The birds, they make it in the spring at night's delicious close. Between the March and April line, that magical frontier, beyond which summer hesitates, almost too heavenly near. It makes us think of all the dead that sauntered with us here, by separation's sorcery, made cruelly more clear. It makes us think of what we had and what we now deplore. We almost wish those siren throats would go and sing no more. An ear can break a human heart as quickly as a spear. We wish the ear had not a heart so dangerously near. So the poem is about hearing the birds at the break of dawn and remembering all of the people that once you had walked with at the break of dawn, that once were in your life at the break of dawn, that at one time your very waking moments might send you to another person. I wonder what X is doing right now while you listen to the morning song from the birds, and how that is so sweet that it's almost too much. Because it is a type of melancholy, because there is a sweetness past. An ear can break a human heart as quickly as a spear, right? This is saying that this sound can kill you. Too much love will kill you, just as sure as none at all. If I'm allowed to quote Freddie Mercury, Farouk Bulsara, we wish the ear had not a heart so dangerously near. It's strange, the world that we find ourselves in today. It is so much easier, and yet so much harder, to disappear. People disappear from your life all the time. At one time, prior to social media, you didn't recognize it. Someone wouldn't be there, and it was maybe someone you saw every year, once a year, maybe once every other year, maybe quarterly. You had a biannual friendship. In the summer and at Christmas, you'd spend time together. And then one summer you don't. And the Christmas too. And you realize, oh, well, this summer. But that summer you don't. And by that point, it's been a year and a half since you've seen the person, and you just forget. But we don't do that anymore. There's too much social media. The quitting someone phase of life, and we all phase in and out of other people's lives, is either too confrontational or too absent completely. We have a term for it: ghosting. You ghost people. People ghost you. It didn't use to have a name because everyone had their own life and everyone had their own things going on, and there wasn't some little screen that you could check in on them. XYZ has a Twitter, don't they? I haven't heard from XYZ in forever. How are they doing? And it used to be before cell phones, every once in a while, you moved houses, your phone number changed, something like this. It wouldn't necessarily have to be that that someone had chosen not to speak to you, or you hadn't chosen to speak to someone. But now we know that person still exists. We know that person's still out there. And it comes to the point. So, okay, people take time away from each other, right? Some friendships aren't all the time. Some friendships aren't constantly. Some friendships don't have to be always. Some friendships need time to breathe. I think that this is probably still a very real thing. I hate to bring up a gendered argument, but in the world of men, sometimes we just disappear from each other's lives, and then you get a text from old Corey, and it's just like you never disappeared, and neither did he. And so, not all guys, right? But this idea of disappearing doesn't really exist anymore. You have to ghost someone. And that's exactly what Emily Dickinson is talking about here. She's speaking about the people you know that have died. And think about that. It used to be every friend you had to death. Not because everyone you ever knew or had as a friend was in your life until they died. Not that you never lost friends. But if you're 65 years old and someone that you stopped speaking to in your 20s dies, well, you don't know about it. They're not currently your friend. You wouldn't say they aren't your friend. They aren't someone important to you. Even if at one point in time you called him a brother, right? He and I were like brothers in school. A certain amount of time and you will forget about them. You will forget who that individual is. But Emily Dickinson here is singing not the praises, singing the curses of the bird's siren song. Is there any... So this is a poem about the people who you remember fondly. This is a poem about the bird songs remind you of the people that you've loved and lost. But it's also about the fact that these sounds can trigger us towards something, towards some emotion that is ever present in us. It just needs to be conjured. What are those sounds, not for people you love and have lost, but perhaps for people you still love? Is there some sound in your life that you hear and it triggers not a memory, but that mental state, the very state of being with that person? Like Emily Dickinson is saying here, that sound in the morning puts you with that person. It makes them real again, but not so real as to touch, not so real as with whom to share a moment. Are there sounds that remind you of the people that you love now and are still in your life? Are there sounds that you can hear and immediately take you to some place you don't want to be? Take you to someone with whom you do not share great memories. I think in today's world, oftentimes, that is the job of music in general. You dated someone, you had a girlfriend, and with that woman you shared a song. You had a boyfriend who told you, "Hey, this song always reminds me of you." Something like that. And you've heard probably that it's scent. Scent will take you will scent is more closely linked to memory than any of the other senses. You've heard that probably. Is it true? I can remember I can remember perfumes from women, and it's weird, right? You smell that scent in public and you're looking for that person. But I think that there are sounds too. And Emily Dickinson here makes the point in the poem. There's a certain time of year when this happens. And heaven, or summer hesitates, almost too heavenly near. The proximity of the words itself stating that summer is itself closer to heaven. But we have, incited by Emily Dickinson here, the spring. This sound coming to us in the spring. Which, yeah, okay. The spring is the symbolic for rebirth, right? Summer, we're getting towards summer. The summer being the point of the spring being here. Spring is the time of newness. Summer is the time of wholehearted living. Okay. But I think even more than that, even more than either of those times that we are just sort of lackadaisically pointing to in this poem is more about the time which is not mentioned here, the time that is only inferred here, and it is winter. Winter comes before spring. We're knowing the winter as the spring approaches. The spring reminds us we have to live, but it is through that winter that we must prevail. It is through that winter that we must trudge. It is through the winter that we have to exist. We have to survive. We have to ourselves survive. I spent a lot of time in libraries in my life, and if you've been around the channel for any period of time, you may have heard me tell this story. I was living in St. Louis, and I would spend approximately 6 hours a day in the library. I believe it was about 6 hours a day. And then I would go to the gym, and then I would go home. So I'd be at the library reading and writing, right? And then I'd go to the gym, then I'd go home, and I'd edit and type, spend the night getting drunk and writing more. Wake up, rinse, wash, repeat, right? There were a couple homeless guys in the library. One of them was always there. This homeless fellow was always there. He'd set up and he'd eat his breakfast, and he'd drink some water, and then he'd sort of gather himself and be on his way. And one day, there was another guy in there with him. a guy I'd never seen before. And he was younger and not as rough looking, right? I'm not trying to be weird or funny or harsh about it, but you understand what I'm saying. Probably he had not been homeless for as long, not so homeless so long as the other fella, that older fella, who honestly, I don't know if he was older, but he did look it. And they were in their conversation, and I wasn't eavesdropping, but sort of what you do when you are in that state, trying to write, trying to create, etc. Maybe you listen to snippets of conversations. And I overheard the rougher looking guy, and he was giving advice. And I don't really remember most of what he said, because what he ended with punched me in the gut. This would have been full bore summer. I'm talking 100-degree. We're in St. Louis, Kansas City, Missouri, Midwest. 100 degrees, humid, nasty, in the middle of summer. This guy looks at the other man and he says, I don't know, but if I make it through this winter, what I'm going to do. And that hit me, because he was older, but he wasn't old. I mean, he looked maybe mid-40s, but rough, mid-40s, but rough. He wasn't aging like Tom Cruise. But you can tell when someone is younger than they look, or older than they look, but you still have a relative idea on how old they actually are. And back in Emily Dickinson's time, that was a real concern. I mean, the winter could be really bad. You might not make it. Any number of people might not make it. The flu, even, is deadly today, yes. Not like it was then. Especially not like it was if there were 2 feet of snow on the ground and you couldn't get out. No one could get out to get you anything. So we have this great pointing to the birds, and the birds during the spring. And then we have, because the spring reminds us of summer, and the summer is living. But the spring and the birds remind us of the dead and the living. But it's all about coming out of winter. It's all about emerging from the time of danger to the time of life. And oftentimes, something like the great morose, the sadness of the soul. Oftentimes, this is communicated as a winter, a personal winter, right? Depression, often symbolized by winter. Things like this. Winter so there's something called seasonal depression. Oftentimes, it is about the winter, about being stuck inside, about not getting the sun, about not getting vitamin D from the sun, all of these things. In this poem, we don't even have it mentioned. It's just pointed to. Or it's not even pointed to. It's what the speaker here has their back against the winter, pointing at all the things that could be coming, that should be coming, that we must get to. It's a pretty sad poem. That's all I have for this poetry discussion. If you enjoy what I do here, hitting the like button tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel. So consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more, and I hope to have you back for the next one.